Hello and welcome back. I hope you're having a great day. And what we read earlier today is that Jack and Praiseworthy were on a boat that exploded and they were shot into the water and they had their gold pouches attached to their belt. But when they went into the water, the pouches weighed them down, and in order to survive, they had to undo their belts and it sunk to the bottom and they survived, but they are now penniless. All right, let's get to reading. Within 10 minutes, there were several boats alongside, fishing passengers out of the bay. When Praiseworthy and Jack landed at the Long Wharf, they were not only as penniless as the day they had arrived, but soaking wet to boot. They had struck it rich, but their fortune was somewhere in the deep of the bay. Gone forever, Jack muttered. But Praiseworthy was undaunted. Mere bits of colored metal, he grinned. We have our good health, damp as it may be at the moment. The captain gave us a very expensive bath, you might say. They wouldn't be returning to Boston with their pockets full of gold nuggets. But return they must. Aunt Arabella would need them even more now with everything at home sure to be lost. And some of you are a little confused about what's going on at home. It's basically Aunt Arabella had money like an inheritance and she has spent it, and now there's no money left to pay bills, and the bills have piled up and you can't ignore the bills. And so the people who want the money, if she doesn't have money to pay them, then they start taking away things that belong to the people. So they'll take away the house in order for her to be able to pay her bills. And that's what's going on. That's the problem. So Jack wants that gold so he can go home and pay all of her bills, and then she can keep her house. But that's not going to happen now because they've just lost all their gold. But leave it to Praiseworthy to be looking on the right side. All right. They had hardly climbed up the boat stairs to the wharf when Jack noticed the Lady Wilma still riding at anchor. Strange, said Praiseworthy. Captain Swain had planned to sail home as soon as he could unload. Maybe he'll let us work our passage off, said Jack. A first-rate idea, remarked Praiseworthy. Without delaying even to dry out, they borrowed a skiff and rowed to the Lady Wilma. Once alongside, they slipped their oars, and Praiseworthy raised his hands to his mouth. Hello, he called. There came no answer. There wasn't even a sound from the other ships at anchor nearby. It was as if they had rowed into a graveyard of sailing vessels. Finally, they climbed aboard and looked around. The crew's gone, said Praiseworthy. There's not a soul on deck. It's spooky, said Jack. Praiseworthy shouted up at the pilot house, Captain Swain! There was no reply, except from a cat sunning itself on a rotting mound of canvas. Soon, another cat appeared from the bottom hatch, and when Jack looked up, he saw a cat walking along one of the yardums. Remember about the cats that walked on in Peru, and those cats had kittens? Well, apparently those cats are still on the boat, and I think that those kittens grew up and had kittens as well. There's nothing here but cats, Jack said. Those cats from Peru. And they appear to have multiplied, Praiseworthy nodded. They went searching through the ship, and everywhere they looked were Peruvian cats and kittens. When they peered into the hold, they saw the cargo was still there, waiting to be unloaded. Rats had gnawed into barrels of smoked fish, and the cats had fattened themselves on rats and fish. What's happened here? Praiseworthy mused. It looks like Captain Swain has simply abandoned his ship. He scratched through his whiskers. Left it to all these cats. A yellow kitten was winding itself around Jack's legs, and he picked it up. This morning they had pockets full of gold dust and nuggets. Now they couldn't pay their fare home. He wondered how they could ever get back to Aunt Arabella and Constance and Sarah. Strange, said Praiseworthy again. They returned to the skiff, and Jack put the kitten in his shirt. They tied up at the Long Wharf and walked into town and tried to find Captain Swain. Instead, they found Mr. Azariah Jones, the Yankee trader. He was standing outside an auction tent beside a barrel of free pickles. "Confound it," he said with a hearty laugh. "I recognize the boy, but is that you behind the whiskers and the red miner's shirt?" "It's me," said Praiseworthy. "Help yourself to pickles. I've become an auctioneer. You had bad luck at the diggings?" "You might say so," said Praiseworthy. "Help yourself to pickles. You look hungry." "Thank you, sir," said Jack. "I am." "What happened to Captain Swain and the Lady Wilma?" "Same thing that happens to almost every other ship that comes in here with the gold fever. His crew ran off to the diggings. Why, there are more than 200 ships out there, rotting at anchor, deserted. Captain Swain couldn't even hire enough men to unload his cargo. Finally, he just gave up in disgust and got himself a passage home. Here's a pickle." "Is Dr. Buckbee still in San Francisco?" asked Praiseworthy. "Not him. He got the fever and gave up on that gold map of his. I heard he was horse doctoring somewhere up the river. Doing fine, too. Me? I'd be doing fine if the rats didn't put me out of business. Town's full of them. Why, a man can hardly stand still at night without something beginning to gnaw on his foot. Blame it, I just got a hold of some flour from Chile, and the rats are stealing me blind." "Rats?" said Praiseworthy. "Did you say rats?" remarked Jack. Mr. Azariah Jones nodded. "I auctioned off a cat yesterday for $15. "Cats?" said Praiseworthy. "Did you say cats?" remarked Jack, pulling the kitten from his shirt. Mr. Azariah Jones clutched the kitten as if it were a nugget of gold. Praiseworthy gave Jack a wink and looked at Mr. Azariah Jones squarely in the eye. "Why, I can safely say that Jack and I can supply you with an unlimited supply of cats. Just provide us with a couple of bags and we'll be back." The cat auction drew such a crowd that the street was almost blocked. Every storekeeper needed a ratter. That's what you call a cat that will go and hunt rats. And the bidding was spirited. Midway through the auction, the signal on Telegraph Hill announced the arrival of a sailing vessel, but hardly a soul left the auction. By late afternoon, Praiseworthy and Jack had a clink of gold pieces in their pockets. Their share of the cat money ran to almost $400. They wandered toward the Long Wharf to see about passage home. The sailing vessel had dropped anchor, and now passengers were coming ashore. Jack couldn't really believe it. $400? They had just made more money than their gold dust would have gotten them. Suddenly, Jack looked up. He saw a young girl in a dark traveling dress that reminded him of his sister, Sarah, coming off a boat. Beside her was a taller girl who reminded him of his sister, Constance. Beside them was a woman in a straw hat and green eyes who looked exactly like Aunt Arabella. It was Aunt Arabella. Jack could hardly believe his eyes. And then he realized that even Praiseworthy had stopped in his tracks. But the woman and the two girls passed them by as if they were total strangers. "Sarah!" Jack called out. The smallest girl turned. "Constance!" Jack exclaimed. The other girl turned. "Miss Arabella!" said Praiseworthy. The woman turned And then, suddenly, despite the disguise of jackboots, the rough red miner shirts, and the slouch hats, she recognized her nephew and the butler who had left Boston so many months before. "Jack! Jack, dear!" cried Aunt Arabella. There was a shout of joy, and they rushed back toward each other. Jack was engulfed in arms. Praiseworthy stood at a slight distance behind. And then, wiping an eye with her handkerchief, Aunt Arabella straightened and smiled and said, "Hello, Praiseworthy." "Hello, Miss Arabella. You're so changed, both of you." "Yes, miss." "I'm delighted to see you, Praiseworthy." "I'm astonished to see you, Miss Arabella, Miss Constance, Miss Sarah." Suddenly, they were all talking at once. "We sold the house," said Constance, "soon as we could. It was so big and so full of musty old memories," Aunt Arabella said. "When we discovered Jack's note that the two of you were running away to California, the girls and I couldn't wait to follow you. It was time to rid ourselves of that house, of the past. It's like being free of a curse. Let me look at you." So, okay, did you guys follow that? So all this time, Jack and Praiseworthy have been looking for gold so they could get back and save Miss Arabella so she could save the house. And this whole time, they didn't realize that Arabella and Sarah and Constance had left soon after them. And of course, it takes them 6 months to get there. And they didn't even care. They didn't even want to save the house. They sold it. And now here they are in California. "Did you find gold?" Sarah blurted out. "Plenty of it," said Jack. "And I drink coffee now." "Coffee?" exclaimed Constance. "They call me Jamocha Jack in the diggings." "How dreadful," Aunt Arabella laughed. She turned back to Praiseworthy, regarding him with a green-eyed twinkle. "And what do they call you?" "Bullwhip, miss." "How fearful. What has happened to your black hat and coat and umbrella?" "Gone. If clothes make the man, as they say, Miss Arabella. I suppose I'm a miner now. Perhaps it's time I shed the past myself." "You make a very handsome miner, it seems to me," Aunt Arabella smiled. "Out here, one man is as good as another." "Only more so," said Jack. Aunt Arabella stood very straight. "I've always believed that." "Will you be returning to Boston?" asked Praiseworthy. "Certainly not." That changed everything, and Praiseworthy crimped an eye, just like Pitchpine Billy. Then he scratched through his whiskers. "In that case," he stopped to gather up his courage. "Yes," Miss Aunt Arabella said. "If I'm no longer a butler, what I'm trying to say is, well, in California, we say a thing straight out." Aunt Arabella smiled. "Then do stop beating around the bush, Praiseworthy." "You see, yes. Women are scarce out here, Miss Arabella. Before you can walk a block, you're going to have 10 proposals of marriage." "How delightful. What I mean to say is..." "Yes?" He cleared his throat. "Maybe this isn't the time or the place, Miss Arabella, but when a man strikes gold, he doesn't lose any time staking a claim." With sudden decision, Praiseworthy whipped off his hat. His mouth was as dry as cured salmon, but he kept talking. "If there's going to be any proposals of marriage, I intend to be the first in line. I've got no vices to speak of, although I have taken to smoking cigars. To say it right out, Miss Arabella, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Constance and Sarah began jumping up and down on their toes. "Oh, say yes, Aunt Arabella. We know you gave him your picture a long time ago." "He carries it in his shirt pocket," Jack exclaimed. Aunt Arabella was smiling through a wet sparkle in her eyes. Marry you? Why, of course, I thought you'd never ask. By the great horn spoon, Praiseworthy gasped. Jack had never seen him so flustered. He stared. Constance stared. Sarah stared. Suddenly, Praiseworthy gave the three of them a grin. Youngsters, if you don't stop staring, I'll take a hairbrush to you. Jack was delighted to hear it. He went on gaping, as did Constance and Sarah. Aunt Arabella held her straw hat against a gust of wind. Then we'll be going back to the goldfields with you, won't we? Oh, it's no place for women and children. We'll make it a place for women and children. We could build a cabin, said Jack, like Quartz Jackson. Perhaps we could at that, Praiseworthy said. On some hill, within the sound of the river, he thought. Why, he might even bring along a law book. He could read it at night. The diggings could use some book law, and a man had to think of making a future. Praiseworthy put Aunt Arabella's hand in the crook of his arm, and they started walking up the Long Wharf. They looked very much like a family. They felt like a family. They were a family. The end.